What's going on, everybody? This is James Grandmaster Facts Boys, and you're here for another episode of the Facts Project. Today, special guest David Swartz. We are here to talk about Confederate Monster, issues 1 through 4. Thank you for being here, sir.
Thank you for having me, James. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. So, with the slew of guests that I've had in the past, of course, everybody, of course, has been mostly creators and just writers and forthright. You, on the other hand, get to dabble on both ends of the spectrum because you're an illustrator and pencilist first, and yet putting this project together, of course, you've had your hand in writing this. So, how did that particularly come to mind? Being somebody that's an artist first, when you felt like you wanted to make your own projects, putting this together, how did that come
Sure.
about?
Absolutely. So, when I first started my comic book career about 10 years ago now, I think that was always the plan for me. I never really saw myself as doing just one aspect of the comic book creation process. I was very much interested in doing all the different aspects of it and doing all of my own stories. I know that I think for some that probably sounds like a fairly daunting task, but I don't know. I think it just became fairly natural for me from the get-go. I'm more of a classically trained artist. I don't really have any formal training in writing,
Hmm.
but I have taken some creative writing classes in college. I've done a fair amount of reading and absorption of story myself. So I like to think that I have a fairly good understanding of how to craft a interesting story and create a compelling world of characters in order to play with. And so I think for me, it was very natural for me to just kind of jump in and do it all.
And to be honest, it should be a more natural way. Usually, I guess you would say that a lot of Japanese manga artists tend to do a lot of the artistry and the storyline themselves, where you
Sure.
don't necessarily see it that much in westernized comics. But to be honest, I'd like to see more of it myself.
I agree. There seems to be a bit of a renaissance in that regard that I'm seeing when it comes to artists starting to write their own projects. I think one of the most notable things that comes to my mind is Sean Gordon Murphy's run with White Knight.
Hmm.
I think that would just kind of, I mean, it blew me away. I think it blew a lot of people away just understanding like, wow, this guy can actually write. And I've seen other artists do that. Francis Manipul. I believe I even heard the other day Ryan Otley did something where he wrote it. So I don't know. I think it might be something that happens more and more often.
And very true. Now, when this all came about, now you're from the Midwest. So
Mhm.
what possibly enter your mind with like, you know what, the allegory of comics is that it's okay to take a subgenre over here and combine it with another maybe popular IP over here and just merge that together.
Mhm.
Where did the idea of Confederate and the Confederacy and yet the mythical legend of somewhat a monstrous creature as Frankenstein come together?
Sure. So, when I was first starting out, I started out with a superhero story, and I felt like it did so-so, but I wanted to challenge myself again, not being a very practiced writer.
Hmm.
So I wanted to just try out a different set of stories. So I created a horror pitch, I created a sci-fi pitch, so on and so forth. And Confederate Monster was my horror pitch. And where I came up with that concept, I I really wanted to do a Frankenstein book. I noticed that Frankenstein was part of the public domain now, so I figured why don't we explore something with Frankenstein? I didn't know exactly what, but I then started to look at what had already been done. And one of the things that started to really become clear to me is there's only a few properties that use Frankenstein in a unique and new way.
Hmm.
Most of the stories that are told that center around this character and the set of characters from the Mary Shelley book, um, it's basically the same story, just regurgitated or told in a different time period, or maybe there's a slightly different relationship between the characters. Um, and maybe he pops up every once in a while in an ensemble group like the Monster Squad or like in Penny Dreadful. He played a role in that.
Mm-hmm.
But again, I felt like there's room to explore here. I felt like I could do a fresh new take and see, what else I could do with it. So I knew I wanted to do a Frankenstein book, but I wasn't necessarily so sure or sold just yet on what time period, what's real backdrop are we going to, drop these characters into. And I started to think, okay, could I do World War II? Everybody does World War II.
Right.
And then at the time, I thought, oh, maybe World War One. But then I think when I first was toying around with it, the first Wonder Woman movie had come out, and it was
Yes.
all World War One. So I was like, I can't do that. So I went back a little further and realized that the Civil War is a backdrop that isn't as used much, unless you're talking about a very specific historically accurate, event. And
Mm-hmm.
so I thought, well, let's play around with that a little bit more, and see if there's any synergy between the Frankenstein story and the Civil War themes. And to my surprise, there was quite a lot that I thought worked well. And it was close enough to the original time that the original story was set that I thought it would be a bit more plausible,
Mm-hmm.
and a little bit more within the wheelhouse of mystery and because the original reanimation process with lightning and all that sort of stuff,
Right.
it worked for Mary Shelley's time.
Mm-hmm.
Most humans didn't understand science, right? But
Very
now,
true.
right? Exactly. So I thought, well, let's play around with that, see if we can find, other ways of doing the reanimation process, or at least elevating the reanimation process during a time period where technology was really expanding, and the Civil War
Mm-hmm.
was perfect for that.
True. True. Now, when we're talking about this, of course, and you brought it up briefly, where history kind of like takes the context, and you've seen this in comics before. Abraham Lincoln Vampire Slayer, shoot, even in indie comics, Harriet Tubman Demon Slayer. You know,
Absolutely.
so like so adding in the context of a legendary time to add in a legendary figure also just makes a more compelling story, because now you can all add footnotes of just timelines continuously throughout the book.
Mm-hmm.
And you created like almost like a slice in the timeline, because what you did was you added a character of Daniel Smith, Dr. Daniel Smith, Schmidt. I'm sorry.
Yes, yes. So,
Daniel Schmidt, who had a chilling secret, of course, being a former lab assistant to Victor Frankenstein.
so he is actually Igor.
Ah,
He,
oh,
he is disguised as Dr. Daniel Schmidt.
mm,
My concept behind that is the first reanimation process
hmm
goes horribly wrong,
hmm
and the monster goes on a bloody rampage. And after that, Victor is thrown into an asylum, and Igor needs to now pick up the pieces of his life. And in my story, Igor is less of a servant to the Frankenstein master, like that
hmm
master servant kind of relationship. Um, the relationship between Victor and Igor in my story is a bit more of a father son, teacher student, protege kind of,
right,
relationship. Very much like the more modern version with Daniel Radcliffe,
right.
where he was more of a protege.
Yeah, it was like
So
an act of tutelage.
yes, exactly. And frankly, I chose that direction because I thought there's much more compelling relationship, fodder there, rather
hmm
than this straight master servant type stuff, right?
hmm
And so, in my opinion, it was only natural that Igor, if he was a true protege of Dr. Frankenstein, would be equipped to be able to change his identity, to, travel the world, to be able to hide and kind of almost reestablish himself apart from his life with Victor. I actually did an issue 0 for this series that you can get in the Kickstarter.
Hmm.
It's a 20-page black and white short story. It's self-contained, and it basically bridges the gap between the original Mary Shelley story and where we pick up
Mm,
the
okay.
story, which is set 8 years later.
Got you. So when we're looking at it from that context, of course, now the new reemerged Dr. Daniel Schmidt is now, of course, I guess now in the deep South. Now, when he is called to action, and maybe in a sense, there's a break in the masses of ranks within the Confederate Army.
Hmm.
And who is now putting the bug in his head as to, we need to either recruit more soldiers, or you, sir, because you're a scientist, can we make soldiers?
So the way that I position it
Mhm.
is Igor is very much in hiding. He doesn't want people to
Right.
know about his past. So, he has a brand new bride, and they're just living a very, it's a relatively quiet life. However, they live in high society. It's not like he's, trying to hide amongst the riffraff.
Yeah, he's in plain sight.
Oh yeah, he's in plain sight. He's a well-established reconstructive surgeon, so his practice is, at the cutting edge of giving fake limbs to these amputated soldiers that come back. Because the Civil War it marks the period in our medical history where amputations on the battlefield became a thing.
Right.
And so I thought, I mean, there is just a match made in heaven here with,
Hmm.
Igor basically taking his knowledge of, the human body and anatomy and applying it to this, reconstructive practice that he establishes. And so, after doing this for many years, he's very much just ingrained within the culture. And so we established, though, that there is a nefarious sort of group in the elites of the Confederacy that are searching for a way to win the war because we're at the place in history where they're losing and they know
Hmm.
they're losing,
Right.
and it's primarily because they don't have enough soldiers.
Hmm.
And so the Confederacy is literally grasping at straws, trying to figure out how they're going to win. And one of the things that comes up is this, fantastical story about a mad scientist from across the pond who, was able to reanimate a dead body,
Hmm.
and his, lab assistant who went mysteriously missing. So they're looking for Igor at this point, and they think that they have found him in Dr. Daniel Schmidt. And so they kidnap him. And as you may see at the end of issue 1, if you get a chance to read issue 1, they very gruesomely uh, convince him to do the deed, to make sure that he can prove to them that he can reanimate a dead body.
Mm. And then almost in the same sense, this puts him at risk, his family
Mm-hmm.
at risk, his new wife.
Mm-hmm.
So ultimately, I'm going to guess that possibly by the end of issue 3, beginning of issue 4, he's almost feeling a sense of, um, I guess, content. Not contempt. I'm sorry, but almost a sense of like, why did I do this?
Yes, he is a very conflicted character.
Conflict. That's the word I meant to say. Yes.
When we begin, we I did a scene where there's a masquerade ball that they host at their house,
Hmm.
and so they are, rubbing shoulders with all the Confederate elite, and in ways, they feel they kind of have to put up a good show of solidarity in order to maintain their status.
Yeah.
Because in researching this book, I found out that there was a rather large faction of prominent people from the South that were not entirely in line with what the Confederacy was aiming for.
Hmm.
And it wasn't a large contingent, but there was some. And I would say Igor counts himself as part of that. He is absolutely disgusted with what's going on,
Hmm.
but he loves his wife, and his wife grew up in Virginia, and she doesn't want to leave that place. It's very dear and near to her. And in her opinion, oh, this whole war mess will be over soon.
Right.
Okay. And so I think we kind of, again, set up a very conflicted Igor in the beginning. And then as we continue on and he gets more and more and more involved in this, I mean, the inner conflict inside of him is just palpable. I mean, he just absolutely erupts at the beginning of issue 4.
Right.
Um, so it's a really complex character, and I'm happy to now get into the second half of the story, where things start to really ratchet up, and we get to really dig into the real meat of
Hmm.
what I'm trying to do here.
Yeah, almost in in the sense of like how everything is going over from what I've been able to skim over within issues 1 and 3. How would he inevitably find an ally?
So I wanted to slowly introduce the classic characters that we're familiar with from the Frankenstein story. So,
Right.
we start out with Igor, and we get into the bride a little, but then we also introduce Victor and where
Hmm.
Victor has been for the last 8 years, and he's been in an asylum. And my first thought was, I absolutely have to show Victor as this crazy, like, prisoner version of himself,
Hmm.
like completely, because the character, not only in my story, but in most iterations of Victor Frankenstein, he's often shown as someone very intelligent, very well to do,
Hmm.
well put together. And so in my story, I wanted to introduce him as the opposite of that, completely out of his mind, disheveled, emaciated, and like biting the heads off of rats. I mean, I wanted to just push it, just push it a
Hmm.
little further, and again, start him off very differently than he winds up in the story. And you'll have to read the issues to really find out how that happens. But I wanted to start to bring in some of these original characters that we're familiar with in the story, to again not only give the fans a little bit of a understanding of where these people have been and
Hmm.
who they are now, but then again give Igor a companion, have them, kind of go through this experience together. And in doing so, kind of, Victor sees a little bit more of, the impact that his decisions have made on Igor.
I was
And
just about to ask that because if Victor has been driven to the brink of insanity, and yet the reunion with him and Igor tend to be in the midst, that introduction and then basically in no that reintroduction and then knowing what Igor has been doing, if that once Victor finds out, it's like, are you crazy?
it's a weird, so Victor has a weird thing where it's like he's now had a lot more life experience. He's
Hmm.
had experiences that, I mean, I don't think he ever expected to have. And in doing so, I think he has quite literally changed quite a lot. However, I also wanted to make it clear that there's still that that power hungry mad Victor inside of him somewhere.
Hmm.
And that is still kind of driving a lot of his motivation as well. So I think in ways, as much as he is dismayed
Yeah.
that Igor is going through this whole, process again,
Right.
um, and history may repeat itself, he's almost a little intrigued as to what will happen.
That's interesting because Igor, of course, was forced to do what he's doing now.
Yep.
Victor seeing the motivational tactics as to what's happening of bringing back the undead and making an entire army out of it might be more intriguing to him than anything. So it's like, well, look, if you don't want to do it, I'll do it.
And that's an interesting thing because, there is an again, I don't want to give too much away.
Okay, got you.
Right, but I mean, when we first kind of are introduced to the fact that Victor is now kind of in the fray, it becomes kind of clear that
There's a power
he,
struggle.
he was kind of part of the plan, and there's an interesting, relationship now between the two of them.
Yeah.
I do in issue two, I do a small sort of dream sequence where Igor is dreaming about meeting Victor after already seeing him in his disheveled, insane state and being very shocked by that.
Hmm.
So he has a dream after where he's meeting him again, but instead of him being insane, he's got his wits about him again.
Mm,
He's the old Victor that he remembers.
right.
And so in that dream, the dialogue in which they use to communicate to one another, the terms of endearment they use, the way in which they describe each other is vastly different than the way they actually talk to one another in the real world.
Right.
Because Victor to Igor is much more loving and benevolent in the dream, but in
Hmm.
real life, he's much more kind of domineering and kind of
Hmm.
almost reinforcing that he's the one who's smarter and
Right.
he's the one who's more, evolved in a way.
I mean, I guess that kind of correlates itself because you see that a lot with people who self diagnose themselves as geniuses, you
Yes.
know. So where you can't tell them anything that they don't possibly know, or
Right.
better yet, you may have a better distinction of the end goal of the assignment, but it's like regardless of what you're telling me, I'm not going to listen to you. I'm going to end up doing it my way.
Right. And Igor, I think feels as though he's a true student of Victor and has almost become that surrogate, version of
Hmm.
him that he wanted to be and that he thought Victor wanted him to be.
Hmm.
And so when you see them interact in the real world, it's pretty obvious that Victor doesn't necessarily give him all the props in the world. He
Hmm.
almost basically gives himself the props and is like, see what good a job I did in
Yeah.
order to give you the life that you
Look how
have.
great you are. I did that.
Exactly.
And see that I guess for the most part it goes back to my question from a few minutes ago. It's almost like he was looking for an ally. He felt like he had one, but even in that type of sense, he necessarily still doesn't have one.
That's
It's the classic trope of like, you know, any particular storyline where you feel like just when you feel like the compassion in the story is about to happen, it gets pushed away.
yep. Yep. Exactly.
Excellent. Excellent. So when we're talking about like there's been four issues of this book. Um how much further into the storyline could you go?
So I have a plan to get to six.
Okay.
So when I first started, I wanted because I have had people ask me, do I do the artwork first? Do I write while I'm doing the artwork? And for me, when I do projects for other artists, or I'm sorry, for other writers, I need a script, right?
Mhm.
I feel much more comfortable just translating directly from a script. And having it be very solid, right? So that there's not going to be, something where, oh wow, like we completely screwed this up and we need to go back to the drawing board and rewrite the script or rewrote the script. So for this book, I have already written the whole thing. I've
Mhm.
gotten all the way to the end of six. And for me, I also wanted my first issue and my last issue to be double issues. So
Uh,
in a sense, the whole story is closer to 8 issues um,
okay.
in number, plus an issue zero. So it's going to be quite long when it gets
Mhm.
to the end. Um, but the reason I wanted to make the first issue and the last issue a little longer is because it comes out of my experience of being an avid TV enthusiast.
Right.
So I love being able to dive into these multi-episode long movies is basically what I call them now, because it's like watching a 10-hour movie most
Yeah.
of the time with these television shows. And I noticed that oftentimes they begin with 2 or 3 episodes to kind of get you hooked. And
Right.
so I started there and I was like, okay, the first issue just has to be a double issue so that I give people enough room to really feel like they're going to get invested in this story. It's
Hmm.
not like it's 20 pages and where it's done. So the first issue gets them hooked, gets them invested. And then the sixth, or well, in the last issue, um, again, another double issue, but it's for the same reason. I want them to feel like their investment is going to pay off, that it's not just, you know, the conclusion is done in 20 pages and I'm left feeling like, oh man, like that went by really quick.
Hmm.
I mean, I know a comic book is a pretty quick read for most people. So I wanted to make sure that I could extend that ending a little bit more. I mean, I don't think I could go much beyond 40 pages without it, being
Yeah.
too much. Um, but again, by doing that, I feel like it lends itself more to a cinematic kind of experience.
Ah, okay. So would you say, I guess, that when you began this storyline, it was almost like when you gave that first two issues, it was like a graphic novel in the beginning. Then you gave them more like an individual piece by piece. And then you're
Yeah.
finishing it off almost in the same sense, of course, but it's like almost like a graphic novel, but it's more like the ending and an epilogue.
Yeah, so it's like I um I wanted the beginning and the ending to feel a little longer, but then the individual like episodes in between to kind of quickly go, right?
Right.
So that you felt like the story had a good pace, right? Because if
Hmm.
every issue is 40 pages, it's like, wow, like I don't know if I can really have the bandwidth to like get through all of this, right?
Hmm.
Um, but I was just thinking about this as you were talking about it. There is sort of a natural kind of ebb and flow to a story. You always want to kind of be pushing and pulling with people's emotions, rising the
Hmm.
tension and then letting it fall. And in a way, I'm kind of doing that with the design of the number of pages in each issue, where you start off with this big climb and then you kind of come down and then up and down and up and
Yeah.
down and up, and then the same thing happens in the end. So yeah, I definitely always am thinking about not just the quality of the art, not just the quality of how I develop the story, but then how am I going to lay it out so that readers really feel like they're enjoying the experience and want more.
That's true. That's true. Now, when you're being how this is six issues,
Mhm.
has there been any type of fourth ground, I guess, that maybe in the future of another genre that you felt like you wanted to push?
Within this universe, or just a totally different
Totally
thing.
different story.
So, I have right now, I'm playing around with an idea that is sort of connected to the original story that I did, which was like a superhero story 10 years ago, where I created a character who was born out of my love of alternative reality theories,
Mm,
and
okay.
just the idea of fringe science and fringe archaeology, and what those theories are kind of telling us and how it's informing us about not only our place within the universe, but our true history and where we came from, because a lot of that
Mm.
stuff is largely guesswork.
Oh yeah.
So I'm really inspired by that. So I took that and I wanted to create a superhero that's kind of based off of a lot of these fringe ideas. And again, I thought I did fairly well with it, but again, it was my first one. I
Hmm.
could have gone so much further with it. And so now that I have a lot of experience, I'm looking back on it and kind of thinking, okay, I think there's some things here that I could explore a little further.
Right.
And I'm thinking about playing around with um, telling one of those stories where there's three different stories going on at the same time, set in different places, set in different times, but they're all in ways like interwoven. It's very challenging to tackle, but again, if you're not challenging yourself, you're not really
Oh yeah,
growing and learning. So I definitely want to challenge myself with the writing with my next project. Yeah.
excellent. Appreciate it. Absolutely. Dave, I appreciate you talking about this with me. This has been excellent. So as of right now, Confederate Monster issues 1 through 4 on Kickstarter has about 3 weeks left, correct?
Yep. We today is the 1 week mark.
Absolutely. So so far so good. As far as right now, it seems to be a fan favorite, and it looks like you'll definitely be funded. So I'll say congrats in advance.
Thank you. I appreciate that. It's with any of these crowdfunders, it's a slow burn sometimes. And I think with me and this book in particular, I did the first 3 issues a couple years ago, and
Hmm.
I did it on a different platform. I did it on Indiegogo. And so taking a bit of a long hiatus, changing platforms for other reasons, not necessarily related to what I did before, but just
Hmm.
trying to tap into a different audience as well as aligning myself with other projects that I'm working on.
Hmm.
Because I had 2 other books that I had contributed my work to on Kickstarter almost at the same time. One of them is since done, but the other one that's on right now is called "Don't Talk to the Dead."
Hmm.
It is in its second issue, and that book is fabulous as well. So if anybody is a fan of Confederate Monster, I would definitely go check that out too.
Absolutely. Now you of course give yourself the title of a penciler by trade. Are there any other projects that you basically have out there? Maybe not on Kickstarter right now, but something that you've done in the past that you definitely like the audience to know about.
Sure. So I've done a finished series with a writer named Caleb Palmquist. The series is called Vampire Detective in Space.
Oh, okay, yeah, because I have Dragon Grid. Yes.
Oh yeah, yeah, Dragon Good's great. It's funny you bring that up because I was working today on a crossover print for Dragon Grit and this book.
Ah.
It's my cowboy Frankenstein riding a Franken dragon.
It's funny because I always talk to Caleb and I said I would like to be see your whiteboard one day. And
Yeah,
just because he is another person that likes to combine IPs and
yeah,
just see how they mesh and then throw it into a story. That's one of the wonderful things about comics. You can pretty much do anything.
yeah, yeah. I mean that is really I think the thing that attracts me the most is just the freedom to tell a lot of different stories in many different ways. And Caleb and I, when working together, we always have a very good working relationship. Vampire Detective in Space is something that I was really interested from the get-go. And I was fortunate enough to jump in on that from the very beginning. So I got to do all the character design and the environment design. I even got a chance to. So some of the book takes place on the spaceship that this vampire character
Mhm.
flies around, and so I got a chance to design the spaceship because it's a pretty prominent set piece in the book, and so I got so excited because I always am looking for cool ways of injecting recognizable iconography into designs. And so I designed the spaceship to basically, when you look at it from above, it looks like a
Mhm.
coffin. So I
Ah.
thought that was kind of fun and cool. And so you can actually get the first digital issue of Vampire Detective in Space with my Kickstarter. It's part of the add-ons if somebody wants to pick that up. I also have issue 1 of another series I did called Bloodsmith.
Mhm.
That one is more of like a Victorian era horror story. I did that with a writer from Australia named Morgan Quaid. Um, and again, very just visually interesting story to conceptualize and put together. So you can find issue 1 of that series on my Kickstarter as well. But I've also contributed a lot of my work to the guys at Bad Bug, Mike
Mhm.
Tenner and Scott Wilkie. We just did Undercity Tales 2. I've been fortunate enough to be the what we call the frame artist on their anthology series called Roseblood.
Mhm.
Uh, and so I basically do like the story that sort of helps to connect all the anthology stories together.
Ah.
So I've done two of those with those guys. I'll probably do the next one. We'll see. I don't know. But I'm also working on a book right now that's not on Kickstarter yet, but it is going to be coming soon. It's called Dino Knights. It's like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, but they're dinosaurs.
Okay.
Uh, it's again, it's a very 90s style, Saturday morning
I was
cartoons
about to
thing.
say, look, I love the Dinobots from Transformers.
Yeah, it's cool. I mean, and it's like there's time travel and there's medieval times and there's
Mhm.
modern times and there's these like techno bot things that are all like crazy. I don't know. It's a fun book. It was a big challenge though because I had to not only design the characters,
Mhm.
but I have to consistently draw four dino people all the time.
All the time.
Yeah, almost every panel has all four of them together all the time.
Oh man. Look, man, that all sounds great. I appreciate it. Of course, as before, 3 weeks left on Kickstarter. Well, actually, 23 days.
Yep.
Confederate Monster issues 1 through 4 live on Kickstarter right now. Dave Swartz, appreciate you doing this with me. This was brilliant, and I'm happy that people got a chance to actually like take a chance in reading your stories for it to come along this long because it seems like the story is getting that much more elaborate. So thank you.
Appreciate it. Thank you so much for having me as well.
Absolutely. So for everybody here at the Facts Project, this is James Boyce, Dave Schwartz, and we are out.